Welcome to the Trailbreaker Podcast. I'm Aaron Feinberg. In this podcast, I explore what it takes to be a trailbreaker. Through intimate conversations with people carving new paths across the landscape of business, art, and sport, we dig in on how to excel across seemingly disparate endeavors. What drives people who manage to succeed multidimensionally? Is it how they think? Is it meticulous planning and follow-through? Or is it some measure of delusional optimism? My guest today is Matan-Paul Shetrit, head of product for A.Team, a company where the world's top builders team up with growing companies in order to make better products faster. Prior to A.Team, Matan was at Brex, Flexport, Square, and Stripe. And when he's not at work, you can find him climbing or enjoying the outdoors with his wife and dog. We talked about how our best work happens when we're part of a team, what draws people to mission-based work, and the importance of making your intentions overt. Good afternoon, Matan, and thank you very much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. It's great to catch up.
I am excited to hear about this new project that you are a part of called A.Team. So why don't we start off by you sharing a little bit about what A.Team does?
So A.Team is a marketplace for talent. And what we do is we help companies by bringing this talent to them to really drive innovation throughout the organization and in their product development cycle.
So in essence, the A-Team is something that you place into a company, or you work with a company to then send them an A-Team to solve different issues or missions or problems?
Exactly. So think about it like, back in the day, companies used to own, let's say, their servers, and then AWS came. We use a similar model, which we call it cloud teams. The idea is you define a mission as a client, and then we tailor a high-functioning team with top talent from across the world to come in and tackle that. And this is very different from the classic, I would say, agency or freelancer model, which is more of a mercenary-based engagement. We see our builders, as we call them, more of like missionaries that come in and really drive change in your development cycle, but also within your org by seeing this new way of doing like technical work and building technology and products.
That makes sense. I just wanted to get a little more clear on the distinction. Why do you call that alternative approach a mercenary approach? Give me a little more understanding about why that is.
Yeah, the classic model of a freelancer was it's like a project based. I need this done. This is the SOW. Let's say this is the cost. This is the hours of allocation. And you come in and you go out. There's no attachment. There's no it's not usually not longer term engagements. So it's very sterile, almost like you come in and you go out. What we found with our model and also the talent that we have, the builders, engagements tend to run between 6 to 18 months. So they're fully embedded in the company. It's not that someone wrote a brief, threw it over the fence, and then whatever you get back, and you don't know what you're going to have at the end of the process. They're fully embedded. They're working with your tech talent and so on. Some of our A-Teams even present to the board in some companies. So like there's really no distinction from I would say, quote unquote, benefit employee to an A-Team that comes to work in your organization.
And the kind of work that these A-Teams do, does it span, engineering, product, marketing? Is it kind of all over depending on what the company needs?
So today we mostly focus on product work. So it would be either engineer, design, PMs, and sometimes growth marketers. But in the future, I don't. Once we show the model is working, there's no difference, for example, for a PMM to be part of that team, because like they also believe in the mission, or for a marketer, or from any like QA and other roles. But we are very much at this point in time focused on the technology product piece. But this is more of a decision of what's the entry point rather than like a longer term, this is the only thing we're going to do kind of thing.
Thanks for that clarification. And when you think about what it takes to be an A-Team member, obviously there's high performing teams have people who are very strong in their particular skill set. They're also strong in the ability to work with other people, and that's kind of a multifaceted set of skills. So how do you guys source support and sort of kind of keep your talent at the highest level?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's a couple of layers to it. This is also what made me interested in what A-Team is building, because it's not just a pure technology product. There's a very strong element of community here. So first off, there's a quote I really like by Steve Jobs, and I'm not going to read the whole quote, but the gist of it is, A players bring A players. And that's very true. So what we're seeing is, by sourcing top talent and vetting top talent, two separate things happen. By getting top talent into the network, we get amazing missions from amazing companies. And the more interesting those missions are, the more that in itself attracts more top talent. But separately, A players like to work with A players, and they bring their own friends and family and coworkers that they've enjoyed working with in the past. I do think that the way we're hiring today in general for companies is somewhat broken, because we over-index on the individual capabilities. But at the end of the day, none of us works in today's world as an individual. We are a part of a team that's supposed to, and some of our best work, it happens as part of that team, and when we push each other. But when we hire you, we don't hire you with the mindset of like, you're great as an individual, but are you actually a fit for that specific project or team? And there's like that disconnect. And the reason we're doing that is because that atomic unit of the individual is actually much easier to screen and deal with. So what we're essentially doing is, we're starting from the atomic unit of the individual, which is these amazing, talented people. And we screen them. We screen them because they're engineers or PM or designers. We screen them on their respective technical skills and needs, but we also screen them for personality traits. We screen them for communications, as well as other soft skills. And then we have proprietary technology that basically says, given those skills and the need by specific clients, what is the best performing team we can supply at this specific time? As you can imagine, some of the people on the network work on A-Team full-time. Some of them do, let's say, only 20, 10, 30, 40, whatever hours a week availability. Some of them have a full-time job in some of the tech giants out there, and they also do this as a side hustle. So it really depends, and all of these factors come into play into this, I would call it this black box, and then we spit out a team with a few bench players that you can choose to supplement with. But at the end of the day, and then we give that proposal to the client, and the client would say, I actually, you know what, your proposal is good, and that goes smoothly. Or they can say, well, I actually don't like Matan, I want to switch him with Aaron, and that's fine. So that's why we have, quote unquote, those other options or bench players that they can then rotate and say, well, I spoke to Matan, and I decided that this is not going to work. There's a culture fit problem. Then let's go with Aaron because he's a much nicer person. But that's really, and then once the team is deployed and they're fully embedded into the company, we provide tooling for the client or the company in this case to see how the mission is running, things like Team Pauls that comes out every 2 weeks, and all the builders review each other. So this way we get data on, are the pairings working? Do people, how's the health of that team? As well as review the client, meaning maybe the client is not the greatest client, but also the client reviews the team. So we get that, that actual pulse on how things are going, and we can feed that back into our model and say, well, maybe Matan and Aaron as a pair is not the best pair, or they're actually rock stars together. And that continues to the next engagements and the next engagements as the network builds itself. So this is kind of like how this engagement model works, and how we have that continuous feedback loop that comes with it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you would want to track all those different metrics on how successful the team is being at solving the mission, working together. One thing that I also thought of as you were talking is also how successful is the A-Team uh, at integrating with the company in which they're now working. Obviously there's so many missions that involve cross-functional partnerships that would be with people that are benefited employees, at these companies. Is that something that you guys also measure, or you ask the client to sort of give you pulse on?
Yeah, so two things on that, I think. First off, as part of the general client reviewing the team, the assumption that Matan and Aaron, let's say we're a team, if we haven't worked well with the marketing department, this will be baked into that feedback that comes in. But funny enough, I think, you know, due to recent event, specifically COVID, the concept of who's like, and because we're not all in the same office, we're not all wearing color-coded badges, it's actually very hard for an individual to know who's a quote-unquote benefited employee versus not. And that distinction becomes even more extreme if you start looking at places outside the US where the idea of a healthcare insurance doesn't really exist, like through an employer. So the only difference is really your stock benefits. But there's nowhere that is written into law that a contractor or a freelancer, cannot have equity. So really, there's no real difference. Like we've constructed this idea that is a notion that's based on like giving you healthcare or not, but it's a construct that we've built into ourselves. And what happened with COVID is because people work remotely, we're not in the office, the tolerance of the fear of companies from this idea of a freelancer has been removed because there's a constraint of talent. They can't get enough talent through the door. They have the capital, but they can't deploy it fast enough and they can't hire. B, like at this point, if an employee is sitting at home, whether they're equity or not, like you have the same concern, which is, are they actually doing the work? So what's driving these companies is a hunger for talent. And a lot of this talent also found out during COVID that they're like, well, I don't want to work this hard. I don't want to work like 80 hours a week for the same company. I want to work. I actually, what gets me, waking up and going to sleep, gets me excited is mission-based work and working with smart and amazing people. So there's this interesting confluence here of of the incentives on both sides of the marketplace, which is like builders want to work on interesting stuff, on challenging stuff, and companies can't hire fast enough. And if they don't have to pay healthcare, especially in the US, then great. And that's essentially what is happening here. So there's also a maturity of organization. And for example, people ask me how many employees are in A-Team, and I don't even know how to answer that question because we use our own product to build the product. But like I haven't, as a hiring manager, don't always know, and as part of the executive team, who has benefits, who doesn't, who has equity, who doesn't. It doesn't really matter. But on the other hand, I can tell you for a fact that if I see amazing people on the network that work for us and do amazing jobs, we should totally compensate them with equity, even though they're not like quote unquote full-time employees. So I think it's just like an antiquated concept of like the labor market more than anything.
That's really, really interesting. And, when you talked about folks wanting to work on mission-driven things, it also got me thinking, and I think I understand what you said at the beginning, where you're using the word mission for synonymous with projects, right? But then when you said, people want to work on mission-driven things, I was thinking about companies that are rooted in a mission-driven approach. So whether it's the Patagonias of the world or some other company or a nonprofit, et cetera. So are you also using that word to mission in that way too, or is it really just mission equals projects or a designated work scope?
No, it's definitely both of those. The mission is much more of it's a much broader concept than a project. And also to something I mentioned earlier, and it was probably not clear, my fault, which is we vet both sides of the marketplace. So, for example, if we don't believe that your mission as a company would be exciting for our builders, we will tell you you are not a good fit. And exciting is not just on the pay, exciting is on the challenge. So, because again, the builders are our most valuable parts of this product. And if the missions we give them access to are not exciting to them, they'll go elsewhere. So we cater kind of like we curate, sorry, both sides of the marketplace here, both to make sure that we have the best talent in the world, but also that we have the most exciting companies and the missions of those companies. And to get even more granular than that, the fact that a company has published a successful mission with us does not mean that when they come again and we want to publish a mission, we will accept that mission. Because it could be that they come in and they have an amazing mission, it's very successful, and then they want to spin up another mission or another team that will tackle, I don't know, building a cafeteria in the building. And we're like, well, this is not relevant because our engineers are not like, they're software engineers, they're not like civil engineers. And we'll tell them that. It's like, this is a not relevant mission. I'm sorry, there's better services to go to that. And we'll send them to those services. But this is actually a really critical component because the goal here is to really cater for the builder community. And that really means continuously maintaining the top talent and also making sure that that talent is engaged by bringing the best and most exciting and most challenging missions out there.
So fascinating. Thank you for all that. And right now, as you mentioned, the last couple of years, the world of work has really been spun in many ways to some really great benefits, from folks being able to work from home, from being able to be a little bit more choosy on what they take on, to sort of reconsider how they're designing their life. And I think ultimately we're all going to benefit if we haven't already. Where you have sourced your talent, you made a strong point around, the great people always hang around with the great people. And I think that is universal. And the fact that we are so global these days, are you finding that you're grabbing talent from particular regions more than others, or is it really kind of spread out all over the world?
No, that's a great question. So we are the main three regions that we are, I would say, predominantly concentrated of talent would be the US, the EU, and Israel. Israel is natural because the two founders are from Israel, and also me. So there's a bit of an affinity and access to talent there. But then Europe and the US is a combination of actually it's a combination mostly focused on not just technical skills but also language barriers and language skills. This is not to say that we don't have people from outside those areas, but what we have found is that there's some constraints that are like outside of like the pure talent. So for example, we have people in Australia, but unfortunately today I would say most of our clients are also based, let's say, the US, Europe, and Israel. So if that is the case, it's actually quite hard to work with a talented individual in Australia because of time zone differences. As we grow the network, and let's say we have more projects that are based, let's say, in Oceania or Asia, that will probably also help us with the coverage there. Similarly, we've seen some difficulties sometimes with talent, let's say, in certain countries in Asia, not because they're not technically capable, but there's like a bit of difficulties around language barriers. So we are actually spending some time thinking, both expanding the network on the client side for interesting challenges for those talents, but also thinking what tooling can we build for these individuals to either bridge that gap of communication, of verbal communication skills, and or help them grow as professionals so they can join the network and get those missions. Because we do think that technically wise, especially in engineering, they're actually phenomenal engineers. But then there's also an element of education also to the client. In a world where the idea of water cooler talks is not as prevalent anymore. Doesn't matter if someone when you say communication skills, what are those skills that you actually care about? Is it as an engineer that I can write a clear and succinct review or like GitHub comments on your code? So if that's the case, it doesn't matter if the person has let's say a heavy accent or they're not as articulate verbally, as long as they're articulate in writing. But then better writing is not necessarily something that is actually, there's software that can help with that. So I think what we're trying to think about is how to do that and how to help those individuals. And by doing that, we also expand the talent we have, and by doing that, we can capture more missions. So there is a self-fulfilling element to it, but it's not an easy problem to be clear.
It sounds like it, and I want to shift us away for a second from A.Team and on your path, because I think, as a man who's born and raised in Israel and has been in the States for how long?
Close, a bit over 10 years, almost 11 years now.
And so I'd love to hear a little bit about what your path has been like, whether it's on the cultural side or the communication side or the integration into new working systems or et cetera. So anything that you would feel comfortable sharing around how that path has been, lessons learned, struggles, obstacles you've kind of overcome. You can kind of take it wherever you want, but would love to hear.
For sure. So I mean, I think especially as a product manager, definitely communications, especially written communications, well, depending on the company, but let's say written communication is extremely important. And to be fully transparent, when I moved from Israel, that was non-existent, meaning I knew how to write and read English, obviously, and definitely speak English somewhat better than I speak Hebrew in some cases. But the written piece was a bit lacking, to say the least. And I definitely had to spend a lot of time, thanks to my wife mainly, who forced me to spend that time, to go and pick up those skills. Now, I think in Israel, the written word, at least in the environments I've worked in, was important, but not as, I would say, as important as it is in the U.S. work culture. And it was for me, it was not an easy path to pick it up, and it's definitely still an ongoing learning experience. I think one of the things that became very, very clear to me, though, and I don't know if it's unique to Israel or also true for the States, is that so first off, writing in general is a skill that needs to be learned, and I definitely did not learn that in school. Not just like because I skipped classes, but like I think there's just not a structured way of learning it. And then business writing is definitely a skill that you don't learn in school, which is a completely different writing than let's say just like creative writing. But to double down on that, like it turned into this really weird thing where I think the company that kind of like matured me the most in that is that during the time I was at Square, and Square really doubled down because of some of the executives that came from Amazon on the idea of a written culture, on like the 6-page memos and so on and so forth. And then once I left Square and I joined a couple of companies after, I went from the person that like, God damn it, I need to write a memo, to like, this is the way we should communicate around the company. So when I joined Flexport, I brought with me like, patterns of like things that I've seen that work at Square. And then when I joined Brex, this is not to say that I've led that change. Definitely not. This was all of it was Pedro, the founder, but like the written culture became very clear that this is like an important thing. And as one of the early PMs, I was a big fan of that, and like whether it's through specs or through memos and so on. So I think I went from one extreme to like the other, which is like, and it's probably also not the right balance, to be very clear. But in a world like we live today, it actually becomes even more crucial because a lot of the work happens in an asynchronous environment. So you can't just jump on a call, because a call is fine, but then there's all these other stakeholders that are either left out of the loop, or they just physically cannot, like they can't keep up, and they're not aware of decisions that are made. So this idea that we can go back to how we ran business is just naive, and will not scale. So companies and individuals also, they want to be successful in this, generally in a global world, but also in an asynchronous world. Like the idea that you can do this without working on your writing skills is very naive, and you will fail. And I say this as someone who has failed in the early days moving to the States.
Well, I laugh because, as someone who can write, I have absolutely been guilty, and many people would attest to this, of being the guy that will pick up the phone and call you or leave you a voice memo, because for me, and while it's selfish and behind the times, because as you clearly articulated, asynchronous communication is kind of the way, and it's far more efficient at times. Me just getting on the phone and talking to you about something, while it's enjoyable and I feel like it's a great way to connect, is not as efficient as doing what I should be doing, which is spending a little more time writing thoughts out, and getting those messages out to people in a broader way. So I might have to follow the Matan way.
Well, I mean, to be very clear, and I do enjoy when you call me out of the blue, because like I think it's also a question of context, right?
Yeah.
So like I would not want to do a coaching session on Slack or on sending each other letters or emails. But I do think that if you're proposing, let's say, a product suggestion or a business plan change, taking the time to put your thoughts in writing, even if you don't end up sharing the memo, it actually is also to your benefit, because it's actually very easy to bullshit a presentation. It is much harder to bullshit through an argument that is written, because people can see it and they can call it out as it is. It's like, wait, what is this logical leap, where you show a graph and like, okay, you can fudge the numbers, you can play with like, sizing and fonts and whatever, but it's actually much harder to bullshit your way through a written argument, because people would definitely catch it. So it forces you to also be more diligent.
And it brings the thought to me about hearing from you a little bit about the differences between culture in the US versus culture in Israel, whether that's the way that people communicate. And having coached a variety of folks from Israel, it's always clear to me in terms of, obviously people from particular areas look and feel similarly, even though they're individuals and they have their uniqueness. But what would you say are the differences as you see them, or as you've experienced them, between the two places, and how it is to work in both spots?
Yeah, so I think so I can honestly talk about myself, and like I think we talked about this a few times, how I've actually made a conscious decision for the last 10 years to avoid working with Israelis, and I ended up now working with 2 Israeli founders, who I know from back in the day. But for me, I think some of the things that are, I would say, quote unquote, prototypical for Israelis, and now, by the way, working with Israelis, I see that that's like a gross exaggeration, because, as you said, individuals are individuals at the end of the day. But I definitely think candor is one of them, to the fault, meaning we're very direct, and we don't beat around the bush. And part of the problem with that is that sometimes, depending on the person on the other side and how they receive it, it could be very hurtful. And I think, for me at least, some of the journey, and again, in no way, shape, or form, at the end of this journey of working in the States, is also seeing how to take, and a lot of the work I've done with you also, Aaron, is how to take that message, which may or may not be correct, but then like massaging it in a way that the recipient would not feel like they're being attacked, but rather understand that this is coming from a place that you actually care and extremely passionate about the work. Um, and this is especially important on first impression. I do think that over time, as people learn to work or have worked with me or with others like that have similar traits, they've learned that this is coming from a place not of like um, attacking for the sake of attacking, but more like communicating and just being extremely passionate about things. Even today, when we started, when we were, you and I were configuring the microphone, you were like, show me Matan with the passion so I can see if you're not blowing out the microphone. And I think like it takes time to figure this out. But once you do, there's a click in people's head. Now, I don't think the responsibility should be for people to get the click in their head. So a lot of that work and a lot of the time I spend is on how to tone myself down while still maintaining that same message. And as you know, from our relationship, Aaron, it wasn't always successful. But that's one thing. I think the other, and this was difficult for me, at least in the earlier days, but still is, the opposite, which is that lack of directness could create a feeling of thrash, because especially as you report to someone or you get your manager to ask you for something, if it's not very like clear and succinct, you're like, you feel like you're running around in circles versus like, okay, so what is it that you actually need from me? Like, just let's spell it out. And it's fine if you don't know, but then let's work together on figuring that out rather than like dancing around the topic. Because I think also, at least from the Israelis I work with now and I've worked in the past, we're very open to feedback.
Yep.
But if you don't tell me the direct feedback, we will struggle in understanding what you're saying.
1 second. Choking on my tea. Hold on. Yeah, I think that that's really well said. And I think that, the candor, the directness, the willingness to share, how one feels at the emotional level, the values level, the assertiveness that I think is so a part of Israeli culture. Those are very strong characteristics that I think many people could learn to tap into. And I think that, on the flip side, as you mentioned, communication is a two-way street. So, whether one person has to dial it down or up, the other person does actually have to work on their side of it too, and reflect back and, to themselves and go, am I being reactive? Am I projecting? Am I, owning my stuff? And could I be, more transparent, more direct, more clear? Am I going around in circles? So I think it's, at the end of it, it's intention. And I think when people make their intentions clear, when they make their process overt, when they really tell people, what they're doing, why they're doing it, it makes that moving past those initial friction points a little easier, and getting to that spot of, okay, we still are all human here. We can really work well together if we can get through these initial feel outs and realize how complementary we actually can be.
No, for sure. I think one of the things that is actually thanks to you, we did one of those, like, I think was it insights or one of those like evaluation, and
yeah, insights.
I started just sending it to people. I was like, here, read this. This is what works and what gets me ticking versus not. And I think it does a better job articulating that than I could ever do. And it also, to your point, frames the conversation or the relationship as well as the intentions, and it gives context to like what's kind of happening in the backstage or the back of the mind, or where people are coming from, and as well as your strengths and weaknesses, so the people are aware, oh, this is something maybe not as good versus that they can do or versus not. And I think it actually really goes a long way in kind of like minimizing that initial like dance, I would say.
Yeah, it gets people away from pathologizing and diagnosing either themselves or anyone else, and realize it gives you language to both describe yourself more clearly and also to have others understand you. And I think when you get people communicating at that level, it's the whole reason those trainings are so fun in getting the whole group together and doing them, is because pretty quickly you're watching how folks who have had friction or who have always seemed to be out of step, through a couple hours of reading each other's reports and talking things through, you wind up with a whole different appreciation. So I'm glad it was useful for you.
Oh no, for sure. And I think there's an example that we both know, that I had some struggles with an individual, and he definitely had some struggles with me. And we shared the reports with each other. And this goes back to like building quality teams. We actually really like each other on a personal level, but we had some struggle on a working level. And we then both read those, and we spent a lot of time explaining to each other what we need, and that did not go as clearly through. And then we both read those reports, and I think within the week or two, there was like a 180 in the relationship, and it became from a source of drain to a source of like flourishing, because there was a clear understanding where each side is coming to the table from, and each side accommodated the strengths and the weaknesses and supplemented them in a way that it was like if we were, let's say, two, let's say, capable individuals. Prior to this, the relationship was not the sum of the individuals. It was actually, we were negating each other, so it was like less than the sum. And after that, it was like a superset of like a force multiplier. And I think that's also what's magical about high functioning teams, because when you are in a high functioning team, you definitely know the feeling, and it's like you're in the zone, everything is gliding, execution is working, and so on. And I think that was like an eye-opening experience. Not to say that I didn't have it before, whether it's like in a professional environment, in the military, or whatever, but it was eye-opening because, to me, historically, I would be like, well, I can't work with this person. Where this was a great example where actually you can, and there's an understanding and like context that needs to happen. But once you have that, like there's a click that happens, and we took a relationship that in theory you could have, maybe in the past I would have said this is not working, to a relationship that we've achieved a lot together. And it's not that I did anything great, it's actually like both sides had to step in and like give territory and give away some of their ego, but also work really, really hard together and see where those like boundaries are. And that made it very clear to me that there's obviously character traits that are more aligned with others, but that does not mean that you can't, like, there aren't things, if both sides are willing or multiple sides are willing, that you can adapt and like create those like high functioning teams.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier, and I don't want you to give up any of A.Team's secrets, but when you talked about sort of this proprietary tools or assessments that you're using to vet people, and I'd imagine it's probably multimodal, from their technical chops to their interpersonal, their personality, communication. Does it in fact include all those things, or are you guys looking at other factors?
Yeah, so it includes a lot of these things. There's still a lot of work to be done there. I think the technical side is actually not the, I would say, quote unquote, the hard problem. It's the soft skills. And again, it really depends on the role. So you can imagine as a PM, if I'm a bad communicator, that's more of a problem than if, let's say, I'm an engineer, just as an example. Not that it's not a problem, but like and what does it mean to have technical skills as a PM? Like what's your technical skills? Google Docs. So like, but joking aside, like I think each one of these roles, and it's not just a role, it's a role and also, let's say, a specific mission or an industry of a company. So another element could be, you can be the best PM in the world in health tech, but now there's a mission in fintech. Are you even a relevant candidate? Not because I don't think you can do a good job, which you probably can, but there's like a learning curve. And it could be very frustrating for the team if they're here to work and execute, and now or the employer in this case, or the company, sorry, to go ahead and then like teach you about the ins and outs of like what does it mean to, like, I don't know, credit card process. So there's an element of that as well, and all of these things come into play. And again, like everything in life, we keep on tweaking and refining them as we learn. Um, but some other stuff, for example, is like time zones. Um, some clients really dearly care that the teams are in the same time zones as their full-time employees. Some don't. Some use the A-Team as a critical project within the organization. Some say, hey, let's bring this A-Team to spike on something that's like completely like out of left field here, completely innovative, does not have indirect communication or contact, sorry, with the core product. So it really depends, and there's no like one size, like there's no like silver bullet like here. It's but like every probabilistic model, there's the suggestion that we see at least at this point on the team, and then we might tweak at the edges to based on like stuff that, let's say, we heard from the client wasn't as well captured yet, and so on. So a lot of our work is how can we take all this information that we get from clients and digitize it so we can do smarter things with it, but also how can we take information about you as a builder, and on one hand digitize and crunch it, but on the other we don't want to lose that essence of a human, because like they're not just numbers, right? So there is an element of human judgment by us saying, well, maybe Aaron and Matan will not be the best pair together, given certain like things that we've seen about them in the past, or maybe they will be, or maybe and we can override those models based on that human judgment. Because again, I want to be very clear: if building teams was easy, we wouldn't be here as a company. Like we would all be doing that. I actually think the place that we see that is probably done as the best jobs is actually not in corporate America or corporate at all. It's in sports. I think if there is a place that we see that team building is done and done well, is in professional sports. Not doesn't have to be professional sport, but in sports, because the concept of a unit and a team is so strong there in team sports. Yeah, you might have the superstars, but like a superstar can only go so far when you have 80 games a season and another like whatever games in the playoffs, or if it's baseball even more, or football less. But like the idea here is like that yes, there's a star, but they're part of the team, and how does that team work together? What's the dynamic? What is the result? And I think there's been a lot of research done on what does it mean to run like a professional sports team. Much more than probably has been done or has been tried to implement in the corporate world. And there's a lot of learning to be taken from there.
Yeah, you keep reminding me of the Tuckman model, and maybe you guys have come across it, where it's how teams progress from forming to storming to norming, and then hopefully performing. And not every team ever gets to that high performing team, and it's really great. It sounds like you guys as the A-Team are in the business of helping teams to actually get that performing team right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely part of it. I think the other interesting thing that we're also seeing is how can we, because realistically it depends on the model of engagement, but a lot of times a company does not say, here's a problem, put an A-Team on it, and we're forgetting about it. There's like a sponsor, whether it's an executive sponsor, or let's say a PM or a technical lead or or a designer from the company. That it's not just about the complexity. It's not about how I bring a unit that works well together. It's also how does that unit then work together with the individual from the org. So in theory, there's like really interesting opportunities here, which is as we learn and grow and develop, how do we take this model and not just bring like A players from externally, but also how do we help your own organization to evolve and use your own A players or your own relevant players, because I assume everyone you hire is an A player, to put them on those missions. And then we can maybe supplement with external, let's call it external players. So this really starts becoming almost like you have an internal draft versus an external draft. And I actually do believe that like the sport analogy works really well here because sport teams restructure their organizations every year, and the cost of not doing it well is actually very, very high. Like now, obviously some of them fail, but a lot of them fail, but there's a lot to learn from how they do that. And I'm not just talking about scouting, I'm talking about like running an organization, the front office versus back office, the incentive structures and so on. So there's a lot to be learned from high functioning athletics teams.
So you may not know this, Matan, but as a high school student, my twin brother and I played on a very high powered soccer team, one that was number one in the country a couple of times. And what's interesting is we were one of the last of the high performing teams of that era. We had been on the receiving end of about 10 years of really amazing players and coaching that had brought up this organization to be in the spotlight. And we had guys that went on to the Olympics or the national team. But our year, we were just this core group of players that had been playing since we were 6 years old together.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some guys that were a little bit better than others, but overall we were just this really high powered team. And the phrase our coach would always say year after year, and he says, we don't rebuild, we reload. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that was a really fascinating approach, to just, we just going to keep plunking the new talent in from, he would see the kids as they were 12, 13, 14. So by the time they were at the high school level and he had them at 16, 17, 18, he knew exactly who he was getting and where they were going to be.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you also see it. So you also see it in the military, by the way, through like whether it's special ops or other specific units that they have their own vetting processes. But, the good and the bad of these like entities is they have a long lead time. So, if you think of, I don't know, like special op units, there's like a 2-year course and they can kick you out at any given point in time based on certain like characteristics or behaviors or patterns that they've identified. Similar to a soccer team, that there's a lead time of, let's say, 4, 5, 6 years. And they're like, well, you might not be a good fit to the team, even though you're talented, for example. Yep. And I think the question here is, and in the world of like athletics, and even military, it makes complete sense. But in the world of the high, fast moving world of like business, how can we condense that and allow you and your organization to basically bring the most highly caliber execution machines that are also passionate about your problem and really help you supercharge your organization.
I think that is a great place for us to stop. And I want to kind of leave everybody with this. If I'm a company or if I'm an individual builder, how do I find you and have a deeper discussion about whether we're a good fit to be working together?
Yeah, good. So you can email me directly. This is like only for Aaron's friends. I am allowing that. So my name is, as Aaron said, Matan, and my email is matan@a.team. But also you can just go on our website, which is a.team, and check it out. As I mentioned, the marketplace is an invite only right now, and will probably stay that way. But you can still like quote unquote apply, and there's a wait list. But if you shoot me an email, I can help you. I can help you cut the line. In an Israeli manner, we don't believe in standing in line. So.
Perfect. Well, look, Matan, it was so great to have you on the show. I really appreciate your time, your thoughts, your candor, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Same to you. Thank you again, Aaron. As always, a pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
The Trailbreaker podcast is created by Aaron Feinberg with production support provided by Michael Morey. More interviews and videos can be found at aaronfeinberg.com.